You're listening to the Big Cast, your source for the latest in financial technology. Brought to you weekly by the Best Innovation Group, with your hosts, John Best and Glenn Sarvati.
Welcome to another edition of the Big Cast. My name is Glenn Sarvati on behalf of the Best Innovation Group, where we like to do cool things with financial technology. And today I've got a conversation with two of my friends in the industry, Steven Ramirez from Beyond the Arc Consulting and Elias Kruger from Long Range AI Consulting. They were both in attendance when I was not able to make it, unfortunately, to the Finovate Spring Conference that took place just a couple weeks ago in San Diego. And we're going to have a conversation about the standouts and the takeaways that they saw from the show, and some familiar names and familiar faces that have appeared on the Big Cast before as well. So you can find out more about that. You can always find out more about the Best Innovation Group by checking out our website, big-fintech.com. And speaking of conferences, our credit union town hall, typically a more or less bi-weekly event, is coming up, if you're listening to this just as the podcast drops, imminently on Wednesday, May 21st at 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific. And this week, we're going to be talking, our friend Mike Lawson will be there as well, who is an absolute road warrior going to all the different events. We are pretty much coming to the wrap-up point of what I think of as the spring conference season. So we thought we'd do a recap and kind of look at the key takeaways across all the conferences that he and I and everybody else that joins this conversation have heard over the course of the last couple months. I would say probably starting with the CUNA GAC, or America's Credit Union's GAC, I should really say. Quarter into the tip jar on that one. And like a very robust conference season, in my opinion. cutownhall.com is the place to go. It is a live and lively interactive discussion. It is free to attend, but you do need to register in advance. Again, that's Wednesday, May 21st, 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific. And if you're listening to this after that date, or if you just were not able to make it, if you go back to cutownhall.com, you'll find a replay where you can catch up on everything that took place there. The big story of the week, actually the big two stories of the week, I would say, both involve Coinbase, one of our companies that we've been looking at quite a bit. Big, interesting week for them. Exciting news more broadly for the crypto space, quite honestly. On Monday after the market closed, it was announced that Coinbase is going to be added to the S&P 500 index. That is a pretty watershed event for the blockchain and crypto community. It's the first financial company that falls into that sector that's being included into the S&P 500, which I think gives it a ton of credibility. It also gives the stock a nice bump because that means that all the index funds that are ETFs and whatnot that are trying to track that space have to add it into their portfolio. And sure enough, it did get a nice bump. The stock was up $50 on Tuesday. Also interesting on that one in my mind is who it's replacing. And again, it speaks to the mainstreaming of crypto, stablecoins, etc. They are replacing Discover, which we have talked about quite a bit, Discover Financial Corp, which is no longer a publicly traded company because it is now being acquired by Capital One. So you've got a very traditional type financial services company being replaced in the mix by a new, I guess what you want to call it, alternative finance, new generation kind of disruptor in the space. So that was a really interesting one. And then just 2 days later at the close of market on Wednesday, they revealed I'm reluctant to call it a data breach because that implies that somebody managed to hack into their system. It wasn't quite that, but it was a data exposure. According to what they're saying, employees outside the U.S. were bribed into providing customer data, including a lot of confidential stuff like, driver's license, social security, credit card, all that kind of good things. There was a ransomware attempt. They refused to pay it. And this is obviously a challenge, especially when you're trying to build credibility. Coinbase's position is we're not paying the ransom. We have this under control. We know what the exposure is. And actually, interestingly, John Best mentioned that, I was the one that kind of mentioned to him when the news of this breach came out. And he said, oh, that probably explains it, because he had suddenly started to get a whole bunch of sketchy texts about his Coinbase account. So clearly he seems to be part of the population that got hit. I forget what the percentage was. They claim it was a minority of their regular users, but we'll see what happens with that. After the $50 increase on Tuesday, Coinbase stock was down $15 on Thursday because of this. And then, to my surprise, to some extent, it was back up on Friday, actually to a new all-time high, even from before the point of the breach. That may be because, again, as I mentioned, all these funds had to make acquisitions to get it in their portfolio. Coinbase is officially, as of Monday morning, the 19th, part of the S&P 500. So there was a clear need, a trigger for demand to get that into the portfolios. I also find it interesting that in this day and age, the disclosure that you lost customer data because your employees were bribed is actually, to some extent, it seems more comforting than someone hacked into our systems. That's neither here nor there. I find this whole thing fascinating, and I'm going to give it some more thought. I'll probably do a blog on it. So if you take a look at the website or the show notes, you'll probably be seeing a link so you can find out a little bit more about the wild ride that Coinbase took over the course of the last week. The other big one that I don't think has gotten a lot of attention, Nevada's legislature is, I don't believe it's technically passed yet, but it appears to be kind of on the verge of passing a special purpose payments bank bill. This is kind of reminiscent of the Fiserv Walmart situation in terms of pay by bank, allowing, I think what it would look like would be retailers and non-traditional FIs direct access to the payment rails, which again, we know has a separate step necessary because the payment rails still have to accept you. So it sounds like, it seems very convoluted to me, and this sounds a little bit like the Georgia Special Purpose Banking Charter that Fiserv got, which is what they'll presumably be using to work with Walmart. But it's a weird one. It reminds me a little bit of Illinois Interchange. It kind of came out of left field and surprised people. I think there's a lot of noise around it, and they'll be curious to see how that plays out. And speaking of the Illinois Interchange, kind of, with all the lawsuits and everything else, that thing is still scheduled to take effect in 6 weeks on July 1. I don't think anyone is ready for that. I think everybody is expecting that the courts will delay it again and or the legislature will fix it in Illinois. But as of now, credit cards are not supposed to be taking tips and taxes and gratuities and charging for them in Illinois as of July 1. So watch this space. That one's going to be interesting. Back to the conferencing. Again, I don't miss Finovate conferences very often. My daughter had the audacity to graduate from college last week on the same days that Finovate was taking place on the West Coast. So I was very happy to find that several of my colleagues happened to be out there. So I reached out to two of them, Stephen Ramirez and Elias Kruger, and we're having a conversation about what they saw and some of the best of shows. Let's have a listen. I've still got some FOMO for missing the Finovate conference last week out in San Diego, but got a couple of colleagues who were there on site. Both were involved in leading sessions there as well. And I can't think of better people to really help us kind of walk through what they saw and what impressions they took away from that. Elias Kruger from Long Range AI Consulting, Stephen Ramirez from Beyond the Arc. Thanks so much to both of you for taking the time to share your impressions.
Hey, Glenn, thank you.
My pleasure.
Well, Stephen, why don't we start with you? I'm just curious what really kind of stood out to you as the key kind of messages, takeaways, companies you really thought kind of separated from the pack.
Well, Glenn, let's just start with the fact that it is AI all the time, everywhere. You and I had a conversation about that, I think, 2 years ago. That still remains to be the case today. Although I would say, and I'm interested in your thoughts on this as well, that there is a maturing of the conversation around AI. I think that while there still is, of course, a very healthy dose of hype and excitement, now, when you start to talk to the bank technology leaders, they are getting more pragmatic about how they integrate it into operation. So that was one of my really key takeaways.
Well, Elias, given that AI is literally in the name of your company, and the fact that you have long range, which kind of ties to the pragmatism I think Stephen's referring to, is you're not treating it as a flavor of the month. This is a long-term play. Does Stephen's comment resonate with you?
It does, and I would second that. I definitely saw more thought around AI. The panel that I was in, we were actually getting into the weeds of how large organizations or even just mid-sized banks can leverage AI. So, and one of the key phrases there was like, never underestimate boring use cases. That tends to be the best things that AI does. So I completely agree with Stephen. There was a lot of talk of AI. Some vendors definitely fleshing, the agentic AI word, or the, the deep fake, or the deep voice. But other than that, yes, completely agree.
And it's funny that one of my other friends, Dave Abishar from here at Candescent, who was unable to join us today, his capsule review was agentic AI, agentic AI, agentic AI. And to the point that you're making, I think, people have gotten more pragmatic about how they apply it, but the whole notion of agentic AI, as we just said, to me, I remember it was sometime kind of mid to kind of fall time of last year was the first time I started hearing that phrase come up. And I remember somebody that I spoke to on the podcast even said, you're going to start hearing that a lot more. And lo and behold, it was like clockwork. I started hearing it all the time. So I think that makes sense. But whether AI or other types of companies, Stephen, what jumped out at you?
I think that there's the other, of course, hot topic is just the incredible velocity behind, fraud, scams, and nefarious acts, if you will. And so there was actually there were actually a couple of keynotes about it, but the entire discussion around cybersecurity was a really critical aspect as well. And I'll tell you that even that it was a top topic, probably not discussed enough, right? Like this is really, like, of course, we've always had cybercrime and fraud as, topics on the agenda, but just the velocity at which it's growing is really troubling. And again, with roots back to AI.
Well, in this, one way to get your finger on the pulse is what resonates with the audience, and the best way to do that is through the best of show votes, which, I mean, I think, it's inevitable that people bring their own perceptions in there. So it's not just the quality of the presentation, but the importance and the urgency of the problem those solutions are, addressing. And two of the winners, Illuma, is dealing with voice prints and biometrics around, authentication, and Herd Security, which was new to me, were two of the best of show winners. And I've heard a couple people talking about Herd Security specifically from the standpoint, I guess their demo was built around a deep fake that they did of the Master of Ceremonies, Greg Palmer, which is a pretty clever way to get people's attention.
Yeah, no, Herd Security definitely stood out to me. I had a chance to talk to their CEO, and what I liked about it was that they kind of had a kind of an educational approach. So they're creating these deep fakes, and then they are going to companies and say, "Hey, this is what is possible. Be advised that this can happen." And almost like giving people the ability to build those just kind of as a test. And in my conversation with the CEO, I said, hey, the next step might be, you might want to create some simulations where you're literally sending people these things and see if people falls for it. Similar to what we have for emails nowadays, right? You have those that you click a link and they say, oh, we got you. And I think that's the direction. And it was great that he was saying, yeah, that's on our, roadmap. So yeah, Herd Security definitely was a top one for me.
Yeah, I didn't get a chance to see Herd, but definitely winning Best of Show got my attention. And so I went to take a little bit of a look at their offering from their website. And so, I think that they are definitely squarely focused on an industry need, right? The way that they position the website is around cybersecurity education, and so I can see that they might use these simulations, to try to get attention. I will say, having worked a lot in learning and development in financial services, the content, the idea is only part of it. The big challenge, as you guys know, is working in a big organization. You're on a learning platform, right? And any content has to integrate into that platform. And at this early stage, Herd is only able to deliver their education programming through Slack, which is not the learning platform of choice for most, large banks.
Interesting. Yeah. I noticed, on your blog, Stephen, you mentioned, you kind of gave your impressions of a sampling of companies. I'm not sure they're all the ones you saw. One of the other Best of Show winners, not a security play, is Penny Finance. And I get the impression you got a bit of a kind of Back to the Future vibe from them.
I really love, it has to go back to Oh God, do I really have to? Yes, 2013, where I might say, hey, I personally am a big fan of personal financial management, right? Like I thought it's a great idea, loved Mint, loved all the companies that promoted it over the course of the last decade. But Glenn, I mean, haven't we found that it just really, as an idea, really hasn't, sort of gained traction? And so I think that this is kind of a refreshed, view on something that just might fundamentally not really be a consumer need.
It's fascinating to me that Mint always comes up. It's like there is such a cult following and, kind of sense of mourning that it went away. But at the same time, the fact that it went away, quote unquote, even though it's technically been integrated into other pieces of Intuit's offering, says that, a big company still had an awfully hard time finding a business proposition that actually made it make sense from an ROI standpoint. But having said that, I agree. There's still a lot of people who are looking for the right magic potion to make that solution work.
Yeah, Glenn, and you hit it right there. I mean, it's the fact that they have updated it so that you don't have to spend the time, which is one of the huge obstacles. You don't have to spend the time setting up your budget and trying, they've tried to sort of smooth out all the friction that comes from personal financial management. But at its core, like, is there a business proposition for banks and credit unions? And I think that, and this was one of the areas of skepticism. Again, I'm an optimist. I would love to see this gain traction, but my skeptical side says, yes, if you provide these tools, consumers might find it interesting, but does it really build loyalty? Does it really build stickiness? My bank offers all kinds of tools that I occasionally glance at, but it really does nothing for my emotional or financial engagement.
And is there a path to monetization at the end of the
Yeah,
day that everybody cares
yeah.
about? There were two other winners on the stage for Best of Show that actually have AI in their name. Finalytics AI. Nice to see them get a trophy this time. They've been on stage quite a bit. I know them well. I've seen them several times. And a company I don't know as well, Solda AI. And Elias, I know you had a couple thoughts on that one.
Yeah, Solda kind of stole the show as being one of the first ones to use like a voice agent, right, for customer service. And unlike some other companies, their demo actually went well. Didn't have problems because some of them had some issues.
Those live demos could be highlighted.
Yeah,
right.
So I think that they definitely caught people attention. I must say that personally, it hit a little bit on the uncanny valley there. The voice agent was almost too real or too perfect to be. It's almost like it's maybe 85, 90% there. But you have to ask the question, is this really where we want to go? And while I see some excitement for this technology, I'm not sure banks or any companies yet are ready to kind of deploy this massively. I think there's still a bit of a customer acceptance idea here, and it'll probably take a little more time. It is encouraging to see that the technology is kind of getting better, but I would say this was more about flash than actual reality here.
Yeah, I love your uncanny valley kind of metaphor. Yeah, that's a good one. But I think you're right. And I always think of like Dragon Software for voice recognition. It's like it may not be at prime time now, but it doesn't mean it won't be at some point in the near future. And the fact, you probably have to look at audience composition and whatnot, but the fact that it actually got enough votes for Best of Show says there's an appetite someplace. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, I'm interested for you guys, just in terms of your, personally, like when I hear these AI generated voices, I mean, I instantly shut down. I really cannot, on YouTube, on, other sources, like as soon as it clicks in, just psychologically and emotionally, it's very clear to me. And I just can't take it any further.
I tend to agree with you. I'm not a fan, but what really gets me, and it can be because of the voice interaction, but it's also true even if you just get into the the VRU at infinite cycle, is right. I want to be able to get out of that loop if I choose. There may be cases where I'm perfectly fine doing that, but give me the option. That to me, that's the big deciding point.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, if all that these agents do is make VRU less painful, right? Because I mean, I'm yelling representative at the first county of number one, click this, click that. I that nothing drives me more insane than those. So if you have an agent that is just helping route the calls, I think that could be helpful. But yeah, for a full displacement, I'm not sure customers are ready for that.
So, kind of lightning round. What anything else that we? I mean, again, I didn't want to focus just on Best of Show. My real goal is to find out what else. And I don't know how many of those you actually voted for, but I kind of like the idea that I rarely have more than two or three of my own votes wind up getting on stage. Anything else that like really jumped out at you folks that we haven't talked about already from an individual company standpoint?
I would mention Anonybit. I think that this is a really interesting idea. It's about taking biometrics, collecting biometrics, and then distributing them in a decentralized way, breaking them up into pieces so that you don't have the organizational risk of having customers all of their biometric information in one, they call one sort of honeypot, for,
Yeah.
a breach waiting to happen. Right. And so I just thought that was a very, kind of sophisticated view of the need and the recognition that more organizations would adopt biometrics if they could, be assured that they could secure it.
I'm not familiar with them. That was one of the things that I particularly, and Elias, you gave me another reason to have FOMO for missing it. I've never seen The Economist on site and I was very upset to hear that I missed that one. But yeah, there was a very high percentage of companies, much more than I would have imagined, that I've never seen on stage at any kind of a venue before. And Anonymit falls in that category. So hopefully some of the ones that really stood out will show up in New York in the fall in September as well, because I'd love to see that.
Yeah,
Elias, any of those
funny
kind of
because me and Steven did not, coordinate this, but Anonymous was going to be my other one. I had a chance to talk to them, quite a bit. We in one of the networking sessions, and I thought they were the right direction, and was hoping they would get more attention. I would say even this, okay, this is great for biometric, but could this maybe be safety by design for all PII, right? What if we encrypt everything and then all of a sudden all our PII is kind of like on this separate and bring it together every time you need it. So I thought that in that sense it might be blazing some new trails there for identity that could make things a lot easier.
Any other companies come to mind? We want to make sure we give a moment in the sun.
If I may add, I also like Express Wages. It was really on the financial inclusion part, which is very dear to my heart. So basically, it kind of allows people that live paycheck to paycheck get like a portion of that pay earlier, and it's kind of managed by their employer manager. So I thought it was a very interesting tool that could really help not just advance the finance, but possibly create some conversations. Of course, there are some challenges in there, but I think it was definitely going on the right direction. And then the other I would say is there wasn't any named here, but a lot of reg tech companies coming up. I feel like that might be the next thing that we're going to be hearing a lot. But deploying the power of Gen AI to help with our convoluted regulatory.
The reg tech thing is so fascinating to me, particularly at this exact moment, because I think the momentum was building in that direction. And now the regulatory environment is just thrown into total chaos. So
right.
Seeing where the dust settles, but I have to agree with you that regardless how it comes out, that there is a play there for AI.
Glenn, one thing I didn't see as I reflect on the days in San Diego, surprisingly little conversation about banking as a service, embedded finance. Not that it wasn't mentioned, but only really mentioned in passing, right? Like not really. If you recall Money 2020 of 2 years ago, it was everywhere. It was the topic that was on everybody's minds, every company presenting. I mean, it really was every single venue, and very little conversation. Obviously, there's been a lot that's happened really from the BaaS side more than the embedded finance side, but But I think that was one really clear sort of missing piece.
That's an interesting point, and I wonder if it's a matter of them kind of laying low because, as you say, it's gotten a bit of a bad name, and there's some smoke that has to clear on that one. And I'm just thinking also, just coming back from Nacha Payments just a week before, pay by bank was a big topic. But again, when you think about the audience for Finovate, banks aren't necessarily sure exactly what their play is. And in many ways, it's almost a way to circumvent them. So as far as at least interchange and things like that. So maybe this would not be the audience you'd be looking to pitch that to, as opposed to a retailer conference or something like that. But I like your approach of what wasn't there. Because I mean, and I mean, did the crypto folks come back? I'm trying to remember how many of those types of companies I saw on stage. Because obviously, you can always find the flavor of the month. AI's been the flavor now for more than a month. But crypto had its day in the sun, kind of backed off. Blockchain in general. Was there much of that?
Interesting how it has evolved. So I think that the hype of crypto led to the maturity of blockchain solutions, led to nothingness. And now I think we're back full circle to crypto again. And I think that there's definitely more of a discussion about, and again, not explicit, right? So this is, I'd say is one of the sub themes, but that it's now okay for banks and credit unions to be discussing crypto again. And I would say I think that for Bits of Stock, which is one of the
best of show
winners, it wasn't an explicit part of their messaging, but I do know that part of their offering is you could also offer crypto as one of the incentives to sort of build deposits. So I think that we're just finding kind of an evolution to that discussion.
I didn't realize there was a crypto component to Bits of Stock, but that's interesting. Again, my friend David Abishar mentioned that was one of the ones that stood out to him. And I remembered when I heard that name come up as Best of Show, it sounded so familiar. And I went back to my notes, and they had presented in the fall last September in New York. And it definitely had stood out with me. I did not give them a vote, but they were definitely one that caught my attention. And I think that it's a play that's out there in terms of engagement in particular that I think makes a ton of sense.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we could go on forever, and we probably will at some point in the future over a beer or something like that. But if people want to find out more from each of you, like I said, I know you've both already written about this. What's the best way, Elias? I know I'm very active on LinkedIn. I know.
Yeah, I'm active on LinkedIn and wide on that lrangeai.com. That's where you can find me.
I will include those in the show notes. Those links. What about Stephen? Again, Beyond the Arc.
Yeah, so you can always find me on LinkedIn. I do make the occasional appearance back on. Can I still call it Twitter? Back on Twitter, just for the throwback. And then of course via the website at beyondthearc.com.
Great. I'll post all that information so people can track you down. Really enjoyed the conversation. Hope to see you both in person, if not before then, in September at Finovate in New York City. Stephen Ramirez, Elias Kruger, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you.
So as I said, a couple of familiar names in that mix. Penny Finance, one of the Best of Show winners. Chrissy Cole has been on the show before. We'll post a link to the interview we did with her when she was, it was, I think, a couple years ago now. And it's, they've made some great progress. I've traded notes with Chrissy, congratulating her on the Best of Show win. And she gave me a quick update. Penny Finance is now a CUSO. And as she pointed out, this is a recurring theme. We've talked about this a few times with a few other companies recently. They are now 100% focused on working through small financial institutions, not just credit unions, but community banks, et cetera. And as she put it, their goal is to eventually become invisible and basically, step behind the curtain and actually be the one that provides the services through those trusted agents, the financial institutions. And another quote she gave me was, a financially healthy customer is a great customer and a loyal customer. And I think, again, that's the value proposition. And if you can do that in concert with credit unions and banks, et cetera, who have that trust and that already existing relationship, I think the rising tide lifts all boats, as they say. The other one we know well, our friends at Illuma Labs, another Best of Show winner, also a CUSO, by the way. A couple of other updates on them, not quite as in real time, but back in last fall, I believe it was September, raised $9 million of Series A capital. So they're rolling along quite nicely, and they actually even got some additional funding this year I don't think it was a disclosed amount, from Stifel Bank out in St. Louis, investment management firm, earlier this year to keep working on their authentication tools. So Illuma on quite a roll, and that's the second time in a row that they have won Best of Show, because they did out in New York back in September last year as well. And then another real-time one, Solda AI, which we spoke about. They announced, even since Finovate, so this is just literally over the course of the last week or two, a $4 million capital raise. I can't imagine that was actually triggered by their Best of Show, but again, some nice momentum from them. Our friends at Finovate did a really rapid-fire job this time of getting all the 7-minute demo videos from San Diego posted to their website, which is freely available and is an awesome resource. You can go back and look at all the past shows, but for this time around, I'll point you to the link that directly takes you to the 2025 Finovate Spring, and you can check out all the demos of the companies that we've just spoken about. We are going to be taking a break from the Big Cast for 1 week. Wish everybody a happy Memorial Day. But we've got some great content lined up already for the next couple weeks after that. Some really interesting new research data being issued right now. My good friends at the Federal Reserve have put out the most recent version of the Survey and Diary of Consumer Finance. And we'll be talking to our friend Claire Green over there. And another woman we spoke to not that long ago, Deidre Campbell, has some more about trust in financial institutions through Edelman's Trust Barometer. So we've got both of those coming up in the very near future. So do stay tuned. Please do, if you don't already, check us out on a regular basis. Set a reminder, whatever it is. We tend to have new content every Tuesday here on the Big Cast, again, with the exception of this coming week for the Memorial Day holiday. You can always find out more again by going directly to the Best Innovation Group website and finding out all about our interesting topics and products and services we provide. A lot of things going on these days around artificial intelligence. Surprise, surprise, as we talked about from the conference. So you have a look at those things in particular. You can always check out the media tab and find our past episodes. And if you're picking this up on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, on Amazon Music, whatever, you should be able to find the show notes as well. And we'll include some links that can steer you to some of the topics of conversation that we had here, including some of those Best of Show winners at Finovate. Again, my name is Glenn Sarvati. You can track me down via my firm 154 on LinkedIn or Blue Sky. The Best Innovation Group is at Big FinTech, or our Grand Poobah John Best at JB FinTech, at both of those same two places. We'll be back in early June. Again, as always, thanks so much for listening.
Check back each week for the latest from the Big Cast. Or better yet, we hope you'll consider subscribing for free via Spotify, Stitcher, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you have questions or comments, we'd love to hear from you. Tweet us at Big FinTech, email info@big-fintech.com, or visit us at big-fintech.com and click on the Media tab, where you can post a comment or check out our archive of hundreds of past episodes. See you next week.